In our social circle, my husband, Adrian, was the textbook definition of a devoted partner. He was the man other husbands were compared to, always pulling out my chair, anticipating my needs before I even realized them myself. But no one knew the silent boundary lines he drew around that devotion. I wanted to go swimming, but Adrian wouldn't allow it. "You're too fragile, Iris," he'd say, brushing a stray hair from my forehead. "And you've always been afraid of the water." But the thing was, everyone who actually knew me before our marriage knew I was an excellent swimmer. I had never been afraid of the water. I wanted to eat at the greasy, late-night food trucks downtown, but Adrian shook his head. "The bacteria, the low-grade oil, your stomach simply can't handle that kind of food." Yet, having grown up in a family that struggled to put food on the table, my childhood had been defined by eating whatever cheap leftovers we could find. My stomach was far more resilient than he cared to admit. I wanted to get a perm, to give my hair some volume and life, but Adrian refused. "Straight hair is classic," he'd soft-spokenly insist. "It suits your quiet nature." My friends, however, had always teased me that my pin-straight hair made me look like a washed-out ghost, arguing that it wasted my sharp, expressive features. One afternoon, while organizing some old digital files, I logged into a college email account I hadn't used in years. An unread message from the City Symphony's recruitment board sat in the archive: "Voluntary withdrawal from symphony violinist audition." I stared at the screen, my hands turning cold. Adrian had told me my audition tape had been rejected. He had held me while I cried, telling me the board just didn't think I was a good fit. Clutching my phone, I drove straight to his office, my mind spinning. But as I reached his door, the sound of muffled weeping from inside stopped me. "If my sister were still here," a young woman sobbed, her voice raw with grief, "you wouldn't have to stare at a replacement's chest just to feel close to her." The blood rushed to my ears, a violent, throbbing pressure hammering against my ribs. 5 years ago, I had received a heart transplant. I stood outside that door for what felt like an eternity, my legs turning entirely numb, waiting for Adrian to say something. To deny it. To defend us. But before he could speak, I turned and fled. At 1 a.m, my phone buzzed with a text from Adrian. It was unusually brief. Just 2 words. "Working late." No explanation, no sweet sign-off. It was entirely unlike him. He knew I hated being alone in the house at night and usually went out of his way to keep me updated. Tonight was the exception. I sat in the dark living room, clutching an old Polaroid photo. The paper was worn, depicting a brilliant orange-gold sunset melting over a vast ocean, the warmth of the light stretching beyond the horizon. When I had woken up from my transplant surgery 5 years ago, someone had left that photo on my bedside table. The nurse told me it belonged to the donor's fiancé. They were supposed to have been married that very month. I still remembered the profound pity in the nurse's eyes. "The poor boy loved her to pieces," she had murmured. "It's a tragedy, really. A tragedy." I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth, the weight on my chest making it difficult to draw a full breath. With trembling fingers, I opened Adrian's social media profile and looked at his banner image. It was a brilliant orange-gold sunset over the ocean. An exact match to the Polaroid in my hand. My own profile banner was our wedding photo. On the day we took it, the photographer had told us to look directly into the camera. But right before the shutter clicked, Adrian had suddenly leaned down, pressing his ear flat against my left breast. I had laughed, trying to push him away, but he remained still, his voice thick and raspy when he spoke. "Don't move. Just for a second." Even the photographer had been touched. "Oh, that's beautiful. You can truly tell how desperately Mr. Morton loves his wife." What I had cherished as a moment of pure romance now felt like a dull blade twisting in my ribs. After sitting awake all night, I finally called Belinda, my closest friend. "Iris? What's wrong? Is your heart acting up again?" Her voice was tight with immediate concern. "We can't delay the evaluation for a secondary transplant." What did Adrian say about the hospital's latest report? With transplant patients, the reality of chronic rejection is always lingering. For 5 years, Adrian had been meticulous about my immunosuppressants, watching me swallow them every morning. I used to think it was devotion. I would wrap my arms around his neck, teasingly asking, "Are you really that afraid of losing me?" But the word "losing" had always made his face go pale. He would peel my hands off his neck, his expression turning cold and distant. "I won't let anything happen to it," he would say. "To it. Not to you." 2 weeks ago, my body had started showing signs of severe rejection. I hadn't told him yet, terrified of worrying him. I squeezed my eyes shut, my voice barely a whisper. Belinda, who was the donor? What was her connection to Adrian? Silence stretched over the line. "You found out?" Belinda asked cautiously. "Did Adrian finally talk to you about it? Has he still not let go of Delilah?" My hand went to my chest. Every beat of my heart felt heavy, a dull ache radiating outward. So her name was Delilah. Hearing my silence, Belinda tried to comfort me. "I know it's hard, Iris. But no one actually spends their life clinging to a ghost. We've all watched him these past 5 years. He's taken care of you with more devotion than anyone could have expected." Maybe she was right. Even if his initial intentions were tied to a ghost, 5 years of shared life had to mean something. Surely he had let go by now. I hung up, changed my clothes, and left the house. I wanted to prove Belinda right. I wanted to fight for my own life, for my own identity. I went to a local boutique salon. I dyed my hair a rich, warm chestnut and got soft, modern curls. Then I went home, cooked a beautiful dinner, and waited for Adrian. When the front door clicked open, I forced a bright smile. Adrian, you're... The words died in my throat. He wasn't alone. He leaned down, gently helping a young woman step out of her sneakers before he even looked up at me. When his eyes finally met mine, his pupils contracted, his face tightening instantly. What did you do to your hair? He didn't even take off his shoes. He strode across the hardwood floor, his hand reaching out to roughly grab a handful of my new curls. I told you never to touch your hair. Why don't you ever listen to me? The sharp tug on my scalp brought hot tears to my eyes. A wave of sheer absurdity washed over me. I wanted to change it, I said, my voice shaking. It's my hair. Let go, you're hurting me. Adrian's expression grew incredibly dark. Have you forgotten about your heart? Adrian, I'm really thirsty, a sweet, youthful voice interrupted us. I looked past him toward the entryway. It was the girl from his office. She stood there, poised and entirely comfortable, showing no sign of awkwardness at having walked into a domestic dispute. Adrian's grip slackened. He turned away from me, his voice softening instantly. I'll get you some water. Your hand is still healing, go sit on the couch. Then he turned back to me, his tone flat and dictatorial. This is Daisy. She's the sister of an old friend. She's going to stay in our guest room until she finds her own apartment. My nails dug so deep into my palms that they broke the skin. What friend? I asked, staring directly into his eyes. Have I ever met her? Before Adrian could answer, a soft, mocking laugh came from the living room. She passed away, Iris. You won't be meeting her, Daisy said, her eyes scanning me with blatant condescension. Though, if she were still here, Adrian would probably be the happiest man in the world. Despite the obvious malice in her voice, Adrian said nothing to defend me. He simply handed her the glass of water. Get your hair straightened tomorrow, he told me, his tone leaving no room for argument. This look doesn't suit you. I bit my lip and said nothing. He took my silence as compliance, just as he always did. Oh, the camellias are still here. Daisy squealed, stepping toward the console table. Don't touch those. I blurted out. Adrian was fiercely protective of that plant. Once, I had clipped a single white bloom to use as a centerpiece, and he had reacted with a cold, terrifying fury. It was the first time he had ever raised his voice at me, followed by a month of absolute silence. Even when I bought 2 expensive, perfectly manicured replacement bushes to apologize, he had refused to look at them. Daisy ignored my warning, plucking a white flower and tucking it behind her ear. How do I look, Adrian? Adrian only sighed, a look of mild indulgence on his face as he moved the pot to a safer shelf. My heart sank into a cold, dark void. What was the point of that month of freezing silence he had subjected me to? Why was the boundary so rigid for me, but entirely non-existent for her? Stepping backward, my heel caught the sharp corner of the wooden coffee table. I stumbled, a sharp pain radiating up my ankle as a thin line of blood began to seep onto the floor. Seeing the blood, Adrian's entire posture went rigid. How can you be so careless? He hurried to the closet and grabbed the medical kit. But before he could even kneel beside me, Daisy let out a sharp cry. Adrian. My hand. I think the cut opened up again. He dropped the bandages instantly, turning his back on me to rush to her side. Does it hurt? Let me see. Do we need to go to the hospital? The blood trickling down my ankle felt ice cold against my skin. I looked past Adrian's frantic shoulders and caught Daisy's triumphant smirk. Iris, Adrian said, his brow furrowing slightly as he noticed my gaze. Daisy's hands are her livelihood. She's a classical violinist. She can't afford any permanent damage. Don't make a big deal out of this. She's like a sister to me. A sister. Of course. If Delilah were alive, he would be her brother-in-law. Exactly, Daisy whined, her eyes shining with mock tears. Adrian promised he'd always take care of me. I caught my reflection in the glass cabinet. My beautiful, soft curls had been pulled into a messy, tangled bird's nest. The physical ache in my ankle was nothing compared to the hollow emptiness in my chest. I don't want her staying in our house, I said. Adrian's jaw tightened. Iris, stop acting like a child. Like a child? For wanting boundaries in my own home? Daisy stood up abruptly, her face flushing red. She pushed Adrian away, grabbed the pot of camellias, and marched toward the door. Fine. I'll leave. I knew your wife would hate having me here anyway. I'll just take everything my sister left behind with me, so I don't offend her precious eyes. Without hesitation, Adrian lunged forward to stop her. As he rushed past, his shoulder shoved me hard, sending me crashing onto the hardwood floor. My injured ankle twisted beneath me, a sharp burst of agony making me gasp. But his words were far more damaging. She's lost her mind over a haircut, Daisy. This is your home. You can stay as long as you want. Daisy was instantly mollified. Adrian carefully took the camellias from her hands, holding the pot as if it were made of spun glass. My gaze drifted out the window to the garden, where 2 empty clay pots sat abandoned in the dirt, their contents long since rotted into the soil. So the camellias had belonged to Delilah. The replacements I had bought were discarded like trash, but the plant Adrian held in his arms was treated like a sacred relic. Adrian, I whispered from the floor, my voice entirely flat. Was her sister the only woman you ever truly loved? The room fell into a suffocating silence. I didn't expect an answer, but the silence itself was a confirmation that carved out whatever was left of my spirit. When I finally managed to limp up to our bedroom, everything looked different. During our marriage, I had tried so hard to make this house feel like ours. But every piece of decor I brought home would quietly disappear within a few days. I'm just sentimental, Adrian had explained at the time. I like keeping things the way they've always been. He wasn't sentimental about the furniture. He was keeping the space frozen for her. I was nothing more than a living container, a warm vessel keeping Delilah's heart beating in a world she had been forced to leave. In the quiet hours of the night, I heard Adrian in the hallway, gently running a bath for Daisy, helping her unpack, making sure she had everything she needed. The tender, protective care that I thought belonged only to me was easily given to someone else. 5 years of shared warmth, of late-night conversations and whispered promises, had simply been a side effect of the heart inside me. When Adrian finally came to bed, he pulled me against him, his large, warm palm resting directly over my chest. He held me tightly, ignoring the stiffness of my body, and sighed softly against my neck. Iris, I didn't want to lie to you. I only kept it from you because I didn't want you to worry. When Delilah died in that accident, her biggest fear was leaving Daisy alone. You have such a good heart, Iris. I knew you'd understand. He spoke with such gentle reasonable certainty that any objection on my part would make me look cruel. I didn't try to pull away, nor did I argue. But the tears slipped silently from my eyes, soaking into the pillow. The next morning, I found Daisy sitting at the kitchen island, sipping coffee. When I opened the cabinet to grab a mug, my favorite ceramic cup was gone. In its place stood 2 customized photo mugs. One showed Daisy laughing with a girl who looked remarkably like her. The other showed Adrian and that same girl, their cheeks pressed together, smiling radiantly under a bright summer sun. I closed the cabinet door, the morning light suddenly feeling entirely too bright. Daisy stepped up behind me, reaching past my shoulder to grab one of the mugs. Do you like this roast, Iris? My sister always insisted on this specific brand. It was a bitter, dark roast. I had always hated it. Adrian was the one who drank it every morning. Oh, and those oil paintings in the entryway, Daisy continued, gesturing toward the hall. My sister loved that artist. I was so surprised to see them here. She took one of the framed paintings off the wall and held it up to me, her eyes gleaming. Isn't it fascinating? Once you fall in love with something, you can never really let it go. I stared at the heavy, dark canvas. I don't like it. Daisy blinked, caught off guard by my directness. The dark, brooding landscape had always clashed with the minimalist aesthetic I wanted for our home. When I had suggested replacing it, Adrian had looked at me with deep disappointment. Iris, as my wife, I hoped you would learn to appreciate fine art. The sound of the front door unlocking broke the silence. Daisy's expression shifted instantly. With a sudden, violent movement, she slammed the heavy frame against the edge of the console. The glass shattered, raining shards onto the floor. She let out a piercing, terrified shriek. Iris. Why would you break my sister's favorite painting? Adrian stormed into the hallway, his face instantly contorting with anger. He grabbed my wrist, his grip painfully tight. Iris. What is wrong with you? Apologize to Daisy right now. I looked into his eyes, seeing only raw, defensive hostility. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. Are you demanding this apology for her, Adrian? Or for her sister? Daisy didn't wait for a response. She sobbed dramatically and ran out the front door. Adrian released my wrist, his voice cold and disgusted. Stop this childish jealousy. And go fix your hair. He shoved a business card for his personal hair stylist into my palm. I don't have time for this. He turned and ran after Daisy. I stood in the quiet hallway, looking down at the card. Without a word, I walked to the kitchen and dropped it into the trash can. I called Belinda. I'm divorcing Adrian. And please, don't tell him about my transplant status yet. Belinda was furious on my behalf, her voice shaking with protective anger. Do you need me to come over? Do you want me to find someone to deal with him? I couldn't help but smile slightly. No. He probably won't sign the papers initially. I'm going to contact a lawyer and pack my things tomorrow. Why wouldn't he sign? What right does he have? I smiled bitterly. She didn't understand. That heart was his holy grail. He would never let it walk out of his life. I spent the afternoon drafting the divorce agreement, printing it, and signing my name at the bottom. Just as I finished, my phone vibrated. It was a colleague from the Symphony Association. Iris, I'm so sorry, but the board rejected your petition to rejoin the first chair. They've already filled the position. Apparently, your husband wrote a glowing, 2,000-word recommendation for the new violinist. The world seemed to tilt. Who is she? A girl named Daisy. She's taking over the lead chair starting next week. I couldn't hear anything else. My eyes drifted to the glass display case in the corner of the room. Inside sat the handcrafted violin Adrian had gifted me when I was rejected the first time. I'll be your only audience, he had promised me back then. Tears finally spilled over my cheeks. I walked over, opened the case, grabbed the violin by its neck, and smashed it violently against the edge of the dining table. In the deep quiet of the night, a metallic snip-snip sound woke me. I reached up to my head, my fingers meeting short, jagged edges. A cold dread washed down my spine. They were cutting my hair. The soft chestnut curls I had chosen for myself lay scattered across the floor like dead leaves. Adrian stood over me, holding the shears, his expression entirely neutral. Before he could speak, Daisy giggled from the doorway. I told him the only way I'd forgive him was if we got rid of those ridiculous curls. I didn't think he'd actually do it. I sat up, my body shaking with a rage so intense it felt physical. Adrian looked down at me, his voice calm and patronizing. The chemical perm is bad for your recovery anyway, Iris. I'm doing this for your health. I stared at him, a ragged laugh escaping my throat. Come on, Adrian, Daisy complained, pulling at his sleeve. I'm starving, and my debut performance is tomorrow. Let's go get dinner. Adrian let her pull him toward the door, but he paused at the threshold. Iris, I bought that lobster bisque you like from the market. And I know you love the violin. I left a ticket for my performance on the counter. I stared at the hair on the floor. I have a severe shellfish allergy. I am not the one who loves lobster bisque. When I finally finished packing my bags, the photo mug of Adrian and Delilah was sitting on the coffee table. I slid my wedding ring off my finger and dropped it into the cup. I called Belinda one last time. Let's schedule the surgery for tomorrow. I was going to give him back his lover's heart. From now on, I would only belong to myself. At that exact moment, miles away, Adrian's phone screen lit up with an automated notification from St. Jude's Memorial Hospital, pre-op verification required for patient Iris Morton. The night air did not carry the scent of rain, only the dry, metallic tang of an approaching frost. Iris did not look back at the iron gates as the taxi rolled down the driveway. Her luggage sat light in the trunk, just a single duffel bag containing her birth certificate, her passport, 3 oversized woolen sweaters she had bought with her own money before her wedding, and a velvet-lined case holding her original student violin bow. Everything else in that house had been purchased, curated, or approved by Adrian Morton, and therefore belonged to the dead. Her scalp still stung where the shears had grazed the roots of her hair. In the rearview mirror, her reflection looked jagged, almost feral. The sheared chestnut strands formed uneven tufts against the pale curve of her neck. She reached up, pressing her fingertips against the rough bristles. For the first time in 5 years, her hand didn't tremble. Where to, miss? The driver asked, glancing up at the mirror. St. Jude's Memorial, Iris said. The surgical pavilion. The driver nodded, switching off the radio. Silence flooded the cab, broken only by the rhythmic click of the turn signal and the heavy, irregular thudding beneath Iris's ribs. Every contraction of the muscle inside her felt like a dry fist clenching around broken glass. The chronic rejection had advanced rapidly over the last 48 hours. Her body's immune system, starved of the compliance she had once forced upon it, had finally declared war on the foreign tissue. It was rejecting the graft with a biological fury that felt less like pathology and more like an exorcism. When the taxi pulled into the hospital's subterranean ambulance bay, Belinda was already waiting by the automatic sliding doors, wrapped in a heavy trench coat, with a folder clutched beneath her arm. Iris, Belinda breathed, rushing forward to take the duffel bag. She caught sight of Iris's shorn hair, and her breath hitched in her throat. My God. What did he do to you? He didn't do this, Iris said, her voice quiet and clear. He just reminded me who he was. Did the board sign off on the emergency allocation? Belinda pulled her inside, guiding her toward the private elevator reserved for the surgical intensive care unit. The donor was an athletic trainer from upstate, brain death following a motorcycle collision yesterday evening. Clean toxicology, perfect HLA tissue match, 0 antibodies. Dr. Chen reviewed your decompensation labs 3 hours ago. He said if we waited another week, your pulmonary pressures would have spiked beyond the threshold for retransplantation. The elevator hummed as it climbed toward the 8th floor. Iris leaned back against the brushed steel wall, her eyes fluttering shut. Adrian is going to receive the automated pre-op alert, Iris said softly. The system still lists him as my primary emergency contact in the central database. Let him, Belinda said, her jaw setting into a hard line. I've already filed your updated power of attorney and the statutory revocation of spousal consent. With the hospital's legal counsel. The moment he steps onto this floor, security will escort him to the curb. The elevator doors chimed open to the sterile, blue-tinted corridors of the surgical ward. Within minutes, Iris was stripped of her civilian clothes and dressed in a pale hospital gown. The nurses moved with practiced, hushed efficiency, inserting an intravenous central line into her neck, taping telemetry patches across her torso, and drawing vials of dark venous blood. Dr. Chen, a gray-haired cardiothoracic surgeon who had monitored Iris since her initial transplant 5 years ago, walked in holding an illuminated clipboard. He stood at the edge of the bed, his dark eyes studying her face with solemn gravity. "Iris," he said, pulling down his surgical mask. "I need to confirm this for the record one last time. You are voluntarily electing for an orthotopic cardiac explantation and secondary allograft replacement due to acute on chronic stage 4 cellular rejection. You understand the surgical risks are substantially higher than your first procedure due to mediastinal adhesions and scar tissue?" "I understand," Iris said. "And you understand that the organ currently sustaining you will be harvested for pathological examination and disposed of according to standard biohazard protocol, as it is no longer medically viable for any other patient?" Iris looked at the green tracing spiking erratically across the cardiac monitor above her head. Delilah's heart. For 5 years, she had carried it like a sacred chalice. She had skipped swimming in the ocean because Delilah had hydrophobia. She had swallowed bland boiled vegetables because Delilah suffered from gastritis. She had kept her hair long, smooth, and dead because Delilah had worn it like silk across Adrian's shoulders. She had let Adrian press his ear to her breast every night, offering her chest as an altar for a dead girl's lingering echo. "Take it out," Iris said. Her voice did not waver. "Every cell of it." Dr. Chen nodded once, signing the terminal authorization. "Prep her for the ore." The sedative hit her veins like liquid ice, spreading up her arm and washing behind her eyes. As the orderly pushed the gurney under the bright, circular lights of the surgical suite, Iris looked up at the smooth white ceiling tiles racing past. She felt the cold air of the operating room bite into her bare skin. She felt the heavy rubber mask descend over her nose and mouth. "Count backward from 10, the anesthesiologist whispered. Iris closed her eyes. 10. She was not Delilah. 9. She had never loved lobster bisque. 8. She was going to swim in the sea. At that exact hour, in the dimly lit dining room of Le Mirador, Adrian Morton was raising a glass of vintage Pinot Noir. Across the white tablecloth, Daisy was cutting into her filet mignon, her diamond-encrusted bracelet catching the candlelight. The bracelet had belonged to her older sister. Adrian had retrieved it from the safe deposit box that morning to celebrate Daisy's appointment as the symphony's first chair. "You should have seen the board's faces when they read your letter," Daisy said, her lips curling into a triumphant grin. "The chairman said they'd never seen a donor patron back an artist with such conviction." Iris's friends on the committee tried to argue that she had 5 years of seniority, but who cares about seniority when you have raw talent? Adrian's fingers tightened slightly around the stem of his wine glass. A sudden, unexplainable tightness pinched behind his sternum. Iris was a competent player before her surgery, Adrian said, his tone low, almost defensive. Her stamina simply never recovered. The stress of first chair would have killed her. "Oh, please," Daisy scoffed, rolling her eyes as she reached for the bread basket. "She's just bitter. She thinks because she has Delilah's heart, she's entitled to Delilah's life. But she's nothing like my sister. Delilah had grace. Delilah knew how to carry herself. Iris is just an empty vessel that throws tantrums when she doesn't get her way." Adrian didn't respond. He looked down at the dark red wine, his reflection distorted against the glass. An empty vessel. The phrase left a sour, metallic taste on his tongue. He recalled the look in Iris's eyes 4 hours ago when he had stood over her bed with the shears. He had expected her to cry. He had expected her to plead, to wrap her arms around his waist as she had done so many times during their first year of marriage, begging him to love her, asking him what she was doing wrong. Instead, she had looked at him with an absolute, bottomless silence. Her eyes had been clear, cold, and utterly detached, as if she were watching a total stranger rummage through someone else's trash. His phone vibrated violently against the mahogany table. Adrian glanced down, expecting an email from his firm's acquisition team. Instead, the screen displayed a system alert from St. Jude's Memorial Hospital's automated portal. Patient admission notification, patient, Morton, Iris status, perioperative. Staging complete procedure, orthotopic cardiac allograft, explant/RE transplant. Surgical suite, or for primary surgeon, Dr. Chen, H. Attending proxy, Reynolds. Belinda. Adrian froze. The breath locked in his throat. Explant. Retransplant. What is it? Daisy asked, chewing her steak. Is it the office? Adrian stood up so abruptly that his chair screeched against the polished parquet floor, toppling backward and crashing into an empty serving cart. Several diners turned to stare. Adrian? Daisy frowned, setting her fork down. What are you doing? Iris is at the hospital, Adrian said, his voice completely stripped of its usual calm authority. He was already reaching into his coat for his keys, his hands shaking so violently he dropped his gold fountain pen onto the carpet. So what? Daisy whined, leaning back. She probably faked a panic attack. Because you cut her precious hair. She's just doing this to ruin my dinner. Let her sit in the emergency room for a few hours, she'll come home when she gets hungry. You don't understand, Adrian choked out, his face turning an ash-gray color. That made Daisy's smirk falter. They're taking it out. Taking what out? The heart, Adrian whispered, the word tearing out of him like a jagged bone. Delilah's heart. He didn't wait for the valet. He ran out of the restaurant into the freezing night air, his coat flying behind him as he vaulted into his sedan. He slammed the accelerator, tires smoking against the asphalt as he tore into the street, blowing through the first red light at 60 miles per hour. His mind was a screaming vacuum. Why would she do this? How could she do this? He had taken care of her. He had measured her sodium intake down to the milligram. He had monitored her blood pressure twice a day. He had forbidden her from straining her lungs in the cold water, from ruining her vascular health with street food, from exhausting herself with the symphony's grueling rehearsal schedules. He had sacrificed his own youth to build a glass museum around her chest. He had kept Delilah alive. He turned the corner toward their residential estate first, desperate to check if this was some grotesque bureaucratic mistake, a clerical error in the hospital's automated outreach system. He threw open the front door of the house, the oak door slamming hard against the wall. Iris, he roared into the dark foyer. Iris. The silence that answered him was absolute. He hit the light switch. The living room was pristine, save for the dark patches on the floorboards where the locks of her chestnut hair lay in scattered heaps. On the dining room table, the handcrafted violin he had bought her lay splintered into 3 pieces, the spruce top cracked cleanly down the soundpost. The bridge crushed to splinters under the weight of her deliberate blow. Beside the ruined instrument sat a clean, crisp stack of legal documents. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Her signature was at the bottom of every page, penned in dark, unhesitating ink. Adrian stumbled toward the kitchen island. On the marble counter sat the mug, the custom photo mug showing him and Delilah smiling on the coast of Maine. Inside the mug, resting at the very bottom, was Iris's platinum wedding band. Beside it sat the unopened container of lobster bisque he had brought home, its cream congealing into a greasy, yellowish skin beneath the fluorescent lights. A cold hand seemed to reach into Adrian's throat, gripping his windpipe. She hadn't had a breakdown. She hadn't run away in tears. She had systematically, meticulously dismantled every single thread connecting her to him, and then she had walked out into the night to have his holy relic cut out of her body. No, Adrian muttered, his voice cracking into a high, desperate whine. No, no. No, Iris, you can't. You don't have the right. He sprinted back to his car, slamming the door, his headlights cutting viciously through the dark as he sped toward the city center. The 8th floor of St. Jude's Memorial was eerily quiet when Adrian burst through the double doors, his tie askew, his expensive wool coat drenched in cold sweat. Where is she? He shouted at the central nursing station, slamming his palms onto the laminate counter. Iris Morton. Where is my wife? The charge nurse looked up, startled, before her expression hardened. She reached beneath the desk and pressed a discreet gray button. Mr. Morton, a calm, icy voice spoke from the waiting lounge. Adrian spun around. Belinda stood there, holding a paper cup of black coffee. Her eyes swollen with exhaustion but glittering with absolute venom. Belinda, Adrian gasped, lunging toward her. What is Dr. Chen doing? Tell them to abort the surgery. She doesn't have my consent. I am her legal husband, I hold her medical power of attorney. You hold nothing, Adrian, Belinda said, stepping forward until she was inches from his face. She pulled a folded legal document from her coat pocket and snapped it open against his chest. As of 2 o'clock this afternoon, Iris executed a full revocation of your proxy. I am her designated healthcare agent. And as her agent, I authorized the immediate explant of her failing donor organ. Adrian felt the room tilt around him. Failing? What are you talking about? She was fine. She took her medication every single morning in front of me. She was in end-stage chronic rejection, you blind, narcissistic monster. Belinda snapped, her voice finally breaking into an enraged hiss. Her ejection fraction dropped to 22% 2 weeks ago. The graft vasculopathy was so severe that 3 of the major coronary vessels were 80% occluded. She was dying right in front of you, and you didn't even notice because you were too busy policing the texture of her hair and feeding your dead lover's sister. That's a lie, Adrian stammered, stepping back, his hands clutching his head. She would have told me. She knew how much, she knew how important. How important Delilah was. Belinda sneered, tears of pure fury spilling over her lashes. Iris didn't tell you because she knew you wouldn't see a dying wife, you would only see your dead girlfriend dying a second time. She knew you'd try to force her into experimental immunosuppression that would have shredded her kidneys just to keep that dead girl's heart beating for another 6 months. I loved her. Adrian shouted, the veins in his neck bulging against his collar. I gave her everything. I protected her. You didn't love Iris. Belinda's voice cut through the corridor like a whip. You loved a biological preservation tank. You made her live in a mausoleum. You cut her hair while she was sleeping, Adrian. Do you have any idea how sick, how utterly twisted you are? Before Adrian could speak, the heavy steel doors to surgical suite 4 hissed open. Dr. Chen walked out, his blue surgical scrub stained with dark spots of blood. He held his mask in his hand, his face pale and lined with bone-deep fatigue. Adrian shoved past Belinda, throwing himself at the surgeon. Dr. Chen. Is it over? Did you save it? Where is Delilah's heart? Dr. Chen stopped. He looked at Adrian not with anger, but with a look of profound, clinical disgust. The explantation was successful, Mr. Morton, Dr. Chen said evenly. The donor allograft was completely removed 30 minutes ago. We are currently completing the anastomosis of the new donor heart. Where is it? Adrian's voice dropped to a ragged, breathless whisper. He grabbed Dr. Chen's forearms with bruising force. Let me see it. Please. Just let me see it. It's all I have left of her. Dr. Chen pulled his arms away with sharp, deliberate force. He signaled to an orderly who was wheeling a stainless steel disposal cart out of the side airlock. On the lower shelf of the cart sat a thick, translucent red biohazard container, marked with yellow warning tape, human tissue, pathological specimen, not for reimplantation. Inside the container, submerged in cold preservation formalin, lay the heart. It didn't look like a holy relic. It didn't look like the poetic vessel of an eternal romance. It was enlarged, misshapen, its outer muscle pale and scarred with fibrous white patches of chronic ischemic damage. Thick bands of fatty yellow tissue clung to the ventricles, and the coronary arteries were stiff, calcified ridges. It was a spent, exhausted piece of biological machinery that had failed its host and withered away. Adrian stared at the container, his breath coming in ragged, dry sobs. He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers grazing the cold plastic of the bucket. Delilah. He choked out. It's not Delilah, Adrian, Dr. Chen said coldly. It's a calcified, necrotic muscle that was slowly killing a living woman. In 48 hours, it will be incinerated in the hospital's medical waste facility. No. Adrian screamed, trying to grab the bucket. You can't burn it. It belongs to me. Security. Dr. Chen barked without turning his head. 2 uniformed guards stepped out from the adjacent alcove, grabbing Adrian by the shoulders and pinning his arms behind his back. Get him off this floor, Dr. Chen ordered, turning his back. If he steps foot in the recovery wing, have the police arrest him for criminal trespass. Let me go. Adrian thrusted against the guards, his shoes slipping against the linoleum as they dragged him toward the elevator bank. Iris. Iris, you can't do this to me. Iris. The elevator doors closed on his screaming face, cutting off his voice in a sudden, merciful snap. Iris opened her eyes to the smell of fresh linen and morning sunlight. The ceiling above her was not the dark, antique mahogany of the Morton estate. It was a pale, airy yellow. A vast picture window stood open just an inch, letting in the crisp, salt-tinged breeze of the bay. She lay very still. Beneath her sternum, where a foreign, heavy ache had resided for half a decade, there was a completely different sensation. Thump. 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 The rhythm was fast, light, and clean. It did not drag like an anchor. It did not skip beats when she shifted her shoulders. It surged with an effortless, athletic vitality that sent warm, oxygenated blood rushing all the way to the tips of her toes. She raised her right hand. Her fingers, which had been perpetually cold and slightly blue beneath the nails for 2 years, were a healthy, radiant pink. You're awake, a soft voice said. Belinda was sitting in the armchair beside the bed, peeling an orange. She set the fruit down and stood up, her eyes bright with tears. How do you feel? Belinda asked, leaning over the guardrail. Iris drew in a breath. She expanded her lungs completely, filling the bottom of her diaphragm until her ribs pressed against the surgical binder. There was no sharp friction, no dull, suffocating weight pressing down on her windpipe. I feel. Iris whispered, her voice rough from the intubation tube, like myself. She looked toward the small mirror mounted on the bathroom door across the room. Her hair was cut into a short, jagged pixie, revealing the sharp, elegant curve of her jawline and the clear, piercing intensity of her dark eyes. Without the heavy curtain of straight black hair Adrian had forced upon her, her face looked striking, vibrant, and alive. Adrian came, Belinda said quietly. The night of the surgery. I know, Iris said. He tried to take the old heart. Dr. Chen had security drag him out. He's been calling the hospital switchboard every 20 minutes for 4 days. He even hired a private medical lawyer to challenge the organ explant, claiming spousal property rights over biological tissue. Iris let out a soft, dry laugh. It was a sound entirely devoid of pain, pure, crystalline ridicule. Property rights, Iris murmured. Of course. To him, Delilah was property, and I was just the safe. The symphony board is in an uproar, too, Belinda added, pulling a tablet from her bag. Daisy had her debut performance as first chair 3 nights ago. It was an absolute disaster. Iris raised an eyebrow. What happened? Without your audio guides and practice transcriptions, which Adrian had apparently been stealing from your desk and giving to her for months, she couldn't handle the tempo changes in the Tchaikovsky concerto. She flubbed the cadenza in the first movement, lost her place twice, and had a meltdown backstage during the intermission. The local critics shredded her in the morning papers. Belinda turned the tablet around. The headline of the City Herald art section read, Nepotism at the Symphony, new first chair crumbles in disastrous debut while veteran talent mysteriously vanishes. Adrian tried to use his firm's PR team to suppress the reviews, Belinda smirked, but the board chairman is furious. He found out Adrian leveraged a $2 million endowment pledge to secure Daisy's chair. Now the board is facing a donor audit. Iris looked away from the screen, staring out the window at the distant horizon, where the bay met the sky. I don't care about the symphony anymore, Iris said. Belinda blinked. You don't? Iris, you spent 10 years training for that chair. I spent 10 years trying to prove I was worthy of occupying space, Iris said, turning her head back toward her friend. First to my parents, then to the conservatory, then to Adrian. I don't need a seat in his orchestra to know who I am. She pushed the blankets down and swung her legs over the edge of the bed. Iris, wait. You're only 4 days post-op. Belinda gasped, reaching out to support her. Iris's bare feet touched the cold linoleum floor. Her knees shook for a fraction of a second, but then her new heart contracted, a powerful, steady surge of life, and her balance locked into place. She stood straight. Her spine was long, her shoulders squared, her chin lifted. Get Dr. Chen to sign my discharge papers for next week, Iris said. And call a real estate agent. I want an apartment by the harbor. One with a balcony, an open kitchen, and no garden. For 3 months, Adrian Morton lived in a waking nightmare. The house on the hill had become uninhabitable. Everywhere he looked, he saw the void Iris had carved out. The dining room table still bore the faint indentation where she had smashed her violin. The kitchen cabinet where the photo mug had sat was now empty, in a fit of drunken despair. 2 weeks after the surgery, he had knocked the mug onto the floor, shattering Delilah's smiling porcelain face into unrecoverable dust. He had tried to replace it. He had ordered 5 identical prints from the original digital negative, but when he held them in his hands, they looked flat, artificial, and dead. Worse still was Daisy. With her disastrous debut, Daisy's facade of sweet, tragic innocence had completely disintegrated. Stripped of her first chair position and demoted to the back of the second violin section, she spent her days lounging around Adrian's house, drinking his vintage scotch, running up astronomical bills on his credit cards, and screaming at him whenever he refused her demands. You promised my sister you'd take care of me, Daisy shrieked one rainy Tuesday evening, hurling a crystal vase against the fireplace. You promised her on her deathbed. And now everyone in the city is laughing at me because of that bitch. Iris. Adrian sat on the sofa, his hair unwashed, his designer suit wrinkled and stained with coffee. He stared at the shattered glass by the hearth. For 5 years, he had convinced himself that Daisy was the sacred link to his lost love. He had tolerated her arrogance, her greed, and her cruelty because she shared Delilah's blood. Now, looking at her flushed, twisted face, he felt only a suffocating, nauseating exhaustion. Delilah never threw things, Adrian said, his voice completely flat. Daisy froze, her eyes narrowing in vicious contempt. What did you say? Delilah never screamed at the servants. Delilah never stole someone else's sheet music and pretended it was her own. Delilah never destroyed other people's belongings out of petty jealousy. Adrian looked up, his bloodshot eyes locking onto Daisy. You aren't Delilah. You're just a parasite who used her corpse to feed off me. How dare you? Daisy screamed, lunging toward him with her nails bared. If Delilah were here, she would hate you. She would spit on you for what you've done to me. Get out, Adrian said softly. What? Get your bags, get your clothes, and get out of my house. Adrian stood up. He towered over her, his face dark with a cold, absolute finality that finally made Daisy take a step back. If you are not gone by midnight, I will have the police remove you for trespassing. And tomorrow morning, I am freezing the trust fund I set up in your name. Daisy's face drained of color. Adrian, you can't. You promised. I kept my promise for 5 years, Adrian said, walking past her toward the front door. The contract is over. He walked out into the rain, not caring that he didn't have an umbrella. He got into his car and drove toward the harbor. He had hired a private investigator 6 weeks ago. He knew where Iris was. He had sworn to himself that he would give her space, that he would let her heal. But the phantom ache in his own chest was killing him. He needed to see her. He needed to explain. He needed her to understand that he finally realized what he had lost. He parked across the street from a newly renovated red brick building, overlooking the marina. Through the large, brightly lit bay window of a second-floor unit, he saw her. Iris was not wearing black. She was not wearing the high-collared, modest silk blouses he had always bought for her. She wore a simple, sleeveless gray tank top and denim shorts. Her chestnut hair was cut into a sleek, modern bob that framed her glowing, radiant face. She was standing in the kitchen, laughing uproariously as Belinda struggled to flip a pancake at the stove. Then, Iris walked over to a music stand in the corner of the room. She picked up a violin. It was not the cheap, delicate instrument he had bought to keep her quiet. It was a dark, resonant Guarneri model, loaned to her by the city conservatory where she had just been appointed as an associate instructor. She lifted the instrument to her collarbone. Even through the double-paned glass and across the rainy street, Adrian could see the power in her posture. She drew the bow across the strings. Her shoulders moved with fluid, unrestrained strength. Her left hand flew across the fingerboard with a blazing, effortless speed that was completely foreign to the timid, fragile woman who had lived under his roof. There was no hesitation. No weakness, no ghost holding her wrist back. She was playing the Sibelius violin concerto, the piece he had forbidden her from ever practicing because Delilah had failed her conservatory audition with it years ago. Iris played it with a triumphant, fiery brilliance that made Adrian's knees buckle against the wet pavement. She was magnificent. She was whole. And not a single drop of her brilliance belonged to him. The next morning, the sun broke through the coastal fog, turning the ocean into a sheet of hammered silver. Iris walked down the wooden planks of the public pier, carrying a canvas tote bag containing a towel and a pair of swimming goggles. The salt air tasted clean and sharp on her lips. She dropped her bag onto a wooden bench, kicked off her sandals, and pulled off her linen shirt, revealing a dark blue one-piece swimsuit. Right down the center of her chest, running from the base of her throat to the middle of her sternum, was a pale, thick surgical scar, the mark where 2 different lives had been cut open and closed. She didn't try to hide it. She didn't wear a high neckline. She wore it like a badge of absolute survival. Iris. A voice called out from behind her. Iris didn't startle. She turned slowly. Adrian stood 20 feet away at the foot of the pier. He looked ruined. He had lost at least 15 pounds, his designer coat hung off his broad shoulders like a shroud. The dark circles under his eyes looked like bruises, and his hands trembled as he held a large, velvet-lined box. You're not allowed to be within 500 feet of me, Adrian, Iris said. Her voice clear, calm, and completely devoid of fear. The restraining order was finalized on Friday. I know, Adrian whispered, his voice cracking. He didn't take another step forward. He stayed right where he was, dropping to his knees on the damp wooden planks. I know. Arrest me if you want. Call the police. I don't care. I had to give you this. He opened the velvet box. Inside lay a handcrafted, antique Italian violin bow, its frog inlaid with mother of pearl and gold wire, a collector's piece worth more than a luxury sports car. It's an original Pecat, Adrian wept, the tears streaming unchecked down his hollow cheeks. I bought it at auction in London 3 weeks ago. It's for you. Not for Delilah. Not for the symphony. For you, Iris. Only you. Iris looked at the bow, then shifted her gaze back to his face. Do you know why I smashed that violin you gave me, Adrian? She asked quietly. Adrian choked on a breath. Because you hated me. No, Iris said. Because you bought that violin to replace my voice. You told me you would be my only audience because you wanted to keep me trapped in a room where no one else could see that I was playing your dead lover's eulogy. I was wrong, Adrian sobbed, bowing his head until his forehead touched the rough wood of the pier. I was insane, Iris. I confused grief with devotion. I thought if I could just keep that heart beating, I wouldn't have to face the fact that I let her die. But these past 3 months, living in that empty house, I realized I wasn't grieving Delilah anymore. I was grieving you. He looked up, his eyes wild with a desperate, pleading agony. I fell in love with you, Iris. The real you. The way you hummed in the morning. When you thought I was asleep. The way you adjusted the blinds to let the light hit the rug. The sound of your laugh. Please. I'll give you everything. I'll sell the firm. I'll buy a house by the ocean. I'll eat at the food trucks with you every night. I'll watch you swim every single day. Just come home. Let me spend the rest of my life making it right. Iris looked at him. She looked at the man who had controlled her breath for 5 years. She looked at the man who had loomed over her like a benevolent warden, measuring her life in milligrams and straight lines. She felt no hatred. She felt no lingering resentment. She felt the absolute, cold detachment of an eagle looking down at a dead branch. You didn't fall in love with me, Adrian, Iris said softly. You just realized that the mirror you were looking into was actually a person, and now that the mirror is gone, you have to look at your own ugly reflection all by yourself. She turned her back on him. Iris. Please, he screamed, his voice breaking into a ragged, pathetic wail. Iris did not hesitate. She stepped to the edge of the pier. The cold, green water of the Atlantic churned 10 feet below her, swelling against the wooden pilings. She took a deep, full breath. Her new heart contracted, powerful, steady, fearless. She bent her knees and dove. She sliced through the surface of the water cleanly, the shock of the cold liquid enveloping her skin like a second birth. Down in the green, silent depths, the light filtered through the waves in brilliant, dancing ribbons of gold. Iris opened her eyes. She kicked her legs with long, powerful strokes, her arms cutting through the tide, pulling herself deeper, faster, freer. She surged back toward the surface, bursting through the crest of a wave into the warm, blinding sunlight. Behind her, on the distant wooden pier, a broken man knelt weeping over an open box. Ahead of her, stretching all the way to the edge of the earth, was the vast, open, unending sea. Iris turned her face toward the horizon, drew in a magnificent lungful of salt air, and began to swim.